Charter Local Edition. Brad Pomerance here on the Central Coast, joined by Chris Ungar. He is the president of the California School Boards Association. He is a member of the San Luis Coastal Unified School Board. And sir, you and your organization is making some noise.
We are making some noise. We want to start the conversation.
We want to start the conversation. Let's start the conversation.
Sure.
The question that your organization posed, the CSBA, is whether California education spending is adequate.
Right.
Please define adequate and adequacy.
Okay. So what we're saying is we believe every child has the right to an education that leaves them college and career ready. So adequacy then is all the things that it takes to get you there. And it is huge, Brad. It is huge. So I did a quick survey of some people in Sacramento, school board members, and I said, so if you had adequacy in your schools, what would you want? What would your dreams and your wishes be? And this was an amazing list of things.
But is adequacy a perfect world scenario, or is it a baseline?
We think it's a baseline. And that's why what we've come up with in our study is that it could be anywhere between about $22 billion and $42 billion annually. And
that we are not funding.
That we are not spending right now.
So what you're saying is, under the current budget proposal by the governor for $71.6 billion, that actually is for all education. Let's focus on K-12.
Sure.
$51.4 billion is his proposal. You are saying that the state needs to spend $22 to $44 billion more.
$22 to $42 billion more to give kids the education that we think they need and that they deserve. And when we look at California, one of the most interesting things about it is we're a rich state, we've got a great economy, but we don't put what's called the effort into it. So we have this wonderful economy, but we're really not dedicating the money to things like education that need to be dedicated to it, and that's called effort. And California's a low effort state?
I hear you.
Or a lower effort state?
I hear you, but let's talk about the past. I mean, if this conversation were being held in 2012, it would feel more appropriate, arguably. What we've seen in the last 2 or 3 budget cycles is K-12 being funded at very generous levels. The governor has been very clear. Everything he wants to do is to get K-12 back to where it was prior to the recession. Prop 30 was about getting K-12 funded to pre-recession levels. Deferrals are being paid off. I mean, some folks feel as if K-12 is such a favorite child that it's to the point that everything else is getting cut, or at least not funded to where it should, at the expense or in favor of K-12.
Well, and again, I would go back to the argument that there are many programs in California that are underfunded. We know that, but we firmly believe that education is underfunded. And when you talk about 2007, it's interesting, the original studies that we looked at were from 2007. We adjusted for the current economy, the current rate of inflation, and children's needs. And that's where we came up with these figures.
So are we at, when you consider inflation, 2007 levels yet?
We would say we're probably close to there in the funding that we've got now. Remember, we had that recession, and so our funding looked like this in the early part of the 2000s. We crashed. We've brought it up. But what we talk about is it's like the drought. And so like the drought, we have some good years. A lot of it's one-time money, but it hasn't solved the drought and the needs of kids.
Here's the question. Is 2007 the year we should be using as our baseline, or is 1978 the year, which is when Prop 13 passed? And that's really when California education funding went south.
Right. And we used 2007 because there was a Stanford study that came out at that time. So that's the baseline we used. Pre-recession we were still short.
But here's the problem.
And Prop 13, of course, Prop 13 not only reduced the amount of tax revenue available, but what it did was it changed the way that money came to schools. So there's a lot, there were a lot of working parts to that.
But here's the problem. We're constantly comparing ourselves to New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. Yeah, they spend much more than we do per pupil, but they also have property taxes much higher than we do. So at a certain level, Californians made a choice. And they continue to make a choice because every time the discussion surfaces about Prop 13 revision in any form, it gets shot down as if it's, the third rail of electricity. I mean, you can't even touch Prop 13. Even when the Howard Jarvis Association says we can reform this little element of Prop 13. So I feel your pain, but Californians, they don't seem to feel the same pain.
Well, and so I would push back and I would say, so what's wrong with comparing ourselves to states that fund education at a much higher level per pupil than California
does? Well, there's nothing
does?
wrong with it, but what I'm saying is I don't know, help me, how we can get to a New York, New Jersey, Connecticut level without Prop 13 reform.
Well, I think it actually is Prop 13 reform, but I think there's other reforms that have to happen as well. So, for example, I know you and I have talked about Bob Hertzberg's proposal to tax services. So that's one option. Do we want to close corporate loopholes? Are there other taxes that we could find increases for? For example, and I know people will laugh about this, but what's going to happen if marijuana is legalized?
I think it's a very significant question because when you say if marijuana gets legalized, I'll put myself out there and say, from what I can tell, the polls I see, it's going to pass.
Right. And I'm not saying that we'll see taxes for marijuana, but
why wouldn't you?
Well,
why wouldn't schools see taxes that flow through marijuana sales?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what that would ultimately look like. I don't know if they'd be talking about sales tax, if there'd be additional taxes on it. I'm just saying that I think what we are talking about, what the California School Boards Association is talking about, is we really need to look at the tax structure in California. There are a lot of things we could be doing, that we could be looking at, that could help us get to that place. But what we want to do is we want to start the conversation because we want to end the drought. We want to give our kids what they need.
What have your Republican friends said about this conversation?
We haven't heard much from the Republicans. It's interesting. We've had many positive things from Republicans about the school reform proposals that we've made. I haven't heard really from the Republicans.
What about from your Democratic friends?
We've just started the conversation. I'm sure we'll be hearing from our friends and the Democratic friends as well as our Republican friends.
What about the governor?
Well, I'm sure the governor is going to say no.
To what?
Well,
what is he saying no to?
Well, the first thing I think the governor is talking about is, given the revenue structure that California has right now, which is high personal income taxes, which we know are unstable, and he talks about one-time monies. Well, clearly he's worried that the next recession that will come along, because historically that's what we've seen, that money will drop out. And so that's why what he's doing is a lot of one-time money. We're thinking we need to have the conversation. We need to look at taxes all in California. We need to look at the amount of effort that we're spending. And we think that
we've been talking about tax reform forever. It's just, will we ever see bona fide tax reform?
Brad, I think we should be seeing it.
Okay.
I think there's a lot we can do in California.
We'll see.
Clearly,
okay. His name is Chris Ungar. We gotta go. His name is Chris Ungar. He is the president of the California School Boards Association. I'm Brad Pomerance on the Central Coast. It's Journal Local Edition.